Dr. Waterhouse. We have a quorum.
Great. Okay, thank you, everybody. Agenda item number 2, committee chair remarks. I would just like to say that this meeting is it'll be the last meeting for one of our members, Dr. Alan Drusis, and I want to give him a shout out and thank him for 6 years of service on this committee, and I'm sure the many other committees that he has and continues to work with for the AVMA and the Riverside County Services. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate that. Appreciate a couple nice words before you guys kick me to the curb, but that's part of the biz.
Any other committee member remarks? Okay, item number 3 is public comment on items not on the agenda. Does anybody have any topics? Jennifer?
No, sorry.
This is a test.
Okay, public member comments on any items not on today's agenda? Okay, hearing none. Item number 4, review and approval of January 22nd committee meeting minutes, please. Jennifer.
On page 3, on page 3, item number 6, the third line, it says Mr. Christy Pulowski. Should be Mrs.
Other committee findings? I have one on page 2, item number 4. The second sentence says 14 cases were reviewed with 4 cases consisting of expert witness testimony. That's a factual error. I know that's what was said in the meeting, but that isn't accurate. All 14 had expert witness testimony. Okay, no other comments? May we have a motion to accept?
Move approval.
It's approve as amended, correct?
Approve as amended, yes.
Did somebody second? Okay. Any public comment? Okay. Vote.
Dr. Pollard,
Aye.
Ms. Pulaski, aye. Dr. Jersey,
Aye.
Mr. Ekman,
Aye.
Dr. Westcheck,
Aye.
Ms. Loretta, aye. Ms. Chappelle, aye. Dr. Warner,
Aye.
Dr. Waterhouse,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, great, thank you. Agenda item number 5, discussion on legislative and regulatory proposals regarding corporate practice of veterinary medicine. Subcommittee for this topic is Christy Pulowski and Stuart Ekman, so I would like to turn it over to them.
Okay, so as you can see, we put in on the 1st of April a status update. The subcommittee had put out notice that we would like some feedback. And as of that date, we had received comments from one group, and that was Animal Policy Group. We had not received any other feedback. We, at that time, felt we needed to hear from more stakeholders. So it involved more than the representatives from the stakeholders. This is an important topic, and we needed to be able to do more research and hear from the actual veterinarians that this involves. So the Veterinary Medical Board decided to write a survey and be very brief in that survey, but be able to get into some of the questions that Animal Policy Group addressed. so that we could be able to actually address some of their questions and know if we were headed in the right direction. So based on that, we put out a survey. If you're a veterinarian, you should have received that survey. If you are a member, excuse me, on the subscriber list for the Veterinary Medical Board. And based on that, we actually had a great response, what we consider a great response in a short amount of time. I believe we're at 500 responses. And that is incredible in this brief time. Based on those responses, this is a concern, and this is something we need to address. So I believe that you have in your packet the questions that were presented, and from the one group that we did hear from. But some of the questions that we asked were, we asked first if they were employed by a corporation, and we based that on the size of the corporation. And then we asked if they had to sign an employment contract. And then they asked if they felt the contract influenced their practice of veterinary medicine or influenced them from exercising their individual duty as a licensed veterinarian to act in the best interest of the animal. 29.79% said yes. That is enough for us to say we are headed down the right road. That's 30%. And I didn't get on and look this morning because it does update, but it might even be more. Another said, if with this contract, do you feel these minimum services, offers, or product sales influence your practice of veterinary medicine? 36.21% said yes. So they are being influenced by the contracts that they are signing. And that is enough in our research to say we're pursuing the right direction. I don't know if we need to go on any further at this point, what you want to do, how you want to handle this.
Question, you said this was in our packet?
No, the questions are not, we just got these. This just went out, but these are some of the questions that were posed to us. These were some of the questions that is in our packet from Animal Policy Group. So I apologize for that, not being clear on that. These questions, this survey just went out last week, and so we could not get the surveys. We just were able to compile these responses and go through them.
Sure. I think it was a great idea. And in that short amount of time, 500 plus responses is in fact remarkable. Would it be possible to get committee members and or public copies of that questionnaire?
I could give them this copy right here, and if you could get them,
Stuart?
I don't have it printed out.
So you don't mind using the microphone, please? Thank you.
I would just like to add a comment that in addition to answering the questions, every individual was given a chance to provide anecdotal information on their own experiences. So we don't just have numbers, we have a more nuanced response in terms of how each individual sees their specific situation.
So we would be able to post that information on our website, but I would remove the individual contact information
Right.
prior to posting, but we can post that.
Yeah, so at the end of the survey, and that was going to be my actual comment, was at the end of the survey, we asked if they if they would be willing to provide additional information. If we needed it, they could give us their contact information. And there were quite a few people who provided their contact information, which was very helpful. So we would have to be able to remove that before this information was made public, because I don't think we could publish that information. So that was one of the reasons why this is not just copied and given to people. There's private information.
I realize this is not a strictly scientific process, but I believe we're injecting quite a bit of bias into the results from this point forward if we continue to discuss the results while the query is still out there. I would suggest that we refrain from posting summaries and any comments on the specific questions until it closes.
What is the format for it? Is it still open, for example?
Yeah, it is still open, so we're still taking responses. It's up to you guys how you want to keep it open.
Stuart, Christy?
Well, I would say we are not getting the responses as quickly now. I think we're getting probably, I think since the weekend, we got about 10 in the weekend, over the weekend, and maybe, I haven't looked this morning, so, it's just kind of they're trickling in. But I would like to leave it open a week, and that would be nice. If we could leave it open a week, I think that's a legitimate amount of time.
Would you repeat again how people have access to this survey?
So the intent from the subcommittee was to send it out to all of our licensees. And so we pulled all of the veterinary email addresses in our room system and we put them into a subscriber email list, and then the survey went from the subscriber list was roughly 1,000. Once we put the veterinary emails in there, it went up to 8,900.
Other committee member questions, comments? Before I open it up to the public, I just want to be clear. You named a couple of statistics. The second one I caught was 36.21% of people felt that products and services that they recommended were influenced. Is
So
that correct?
I can read all of the questions if it would be easier. So my first question was, are you currently or have you ever been employed by a corporation to perform veterinary medical services? The second question was, if yes, what is the ownership size? Meaning how many veterinary hospitals are owned by the corporation? And we gave them 1 to 5, 6 to 10, or more than 11. And we have the breakdown of the responses on that one. Question 3, are you required to sign an employment contract with this corporation? Question 4, if yes, do you feel this contract influences your practice of veterinary medicine or influences you from exercising your individual duty as a licensed veterinarian to act in the best interest of the animal? Question 5, does this contract require veterinary medical services, product benchmarks, or minimum numbers of veterinary services, products to be offered or sold to clients to maintain employment? Question 6, if yes, do you feel these minimum services, offers, or product sales influence your practice of veterinary medicine? Question 7, are you limited to treating animal patients with certain products or medications? For example, only certain manufacturer of drugs is available for treatment. And then the last question just said, thank you for participating in our survey. If you are interested in providing more information, please provide your name and email address, but it's not required.
And how many of those 500 provided contact just for kicks?
At this point, actually I have quite a few. I don't have,
Or half?
I would say, I don't actually have the number.
So
Yeah,
seven.
I think we're at,
For contact information?
yeah, I think up to 100. Yeah, I believe we're around 100.
How many people who responded did not work for the corporation?
So I think that would be difficult to discern because they said yes or no to that first question.
Yeah.
But because it's not tied to individual responses in the summaries, there were a number of people who could skip questions And so it'll tell how many it skipped.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard because it's just a percent. Well, at this time when I wrote this and understand, when I printed this was, we only had 474 responses. So, though at the time of this one, only 99 were not currently employed by the corporation.
99 on almost 500.
Out of 474 at this time.
Well, Dr. Drusis makes a good point. It's certainly not statistically valid, but I think it's a great start. I think it's a very good window. I mean, we have to start the conversation somewhere. And I don't know if there's a need or requirement to make it statistically valid or make the next one more valid. But I like it. I thought it's a great idea.
Well, I believe it was the best way for us to decide if you're wanting us to research something to know that we are gathering information and headed down the right road. We needed to know that we're getting the information correctly and why we're getting the information. Are we getting it for the right reasons?
Stuart.
I would just add that we realize there's a limited ability for the profession to come and express their views here. And this provided a way to reach out and for individuals to get back to us with useful information. So perhaps we might do the same survey again after a period of time. But I'd also add that I think the survey itself is useful for whatever topics might come in front of this group.
Christy.
Well, in going through the individual comments, I would say the biggest way that they are being influenced is through their pay. And they feel that if they don't meet benchmarks or they don't meet, if they're not seeing enough patients or they're not following the protocols, these are comments directly from these individuals. They are going to be terminated. They're going to owe their employer money, or they're going to have to take a decrease in their salary. And that comment is repeated throughout every single question. And so it is influencing them because they say that it affects the way their equipment that they have, it affects the number of staff they have, it affects everything that they do. And so if they're fearing that, they're not going to come before us and share these grievances because they're worried they're going to lose their jobs. They're worried, this is their fear, this is their livelihood. And so several people in here mentioned, I'm glad this is being discussed. Because they do fear it. This is something they're afraid of, but they can't talk about it. They can't openly discuss this. This is their job. This is how they get paid. They're already worried about how they're going to have to pay back their employer in their contract if they don't produce enough. So it is something that it influences the way they practice medicine.
I would just like to add, before we open it up to the public, that in a broader picture, whether one works for a corporation or works for a privately owned entity, one still has to produce, or not just your job, but the business is going to stay there, right? So I don't know that I want to leave the impression that it's a damnation of corporate ownership, but I do think we need to flesh out some of the details. I thought the questions that you picked were excellent. I really am interested to hear what everybody has to say.
That is discussed in here, and they have actually compared and contrasted their personal experience between private and corporation. And some have said they didn't have the demands of the number of patients, and that's the difference, or the products that they had to sell. And so I think that's where the difference came in. They had more flexibility in what they were allowed to do between just a private versus a corporation.
And that difference, do you have a breakdown of those?
I have it in comments. I don't have it in, and I've gone through and I've actually written for every question. I've written repeated comments, so the most common comments that were made, and so those were just some of the highlights of the comments that we had.
I think that would be valuable.
Yeah.
Somebody who's responding that has the experience of both worlds. Because if this is your own job, you don't have anything to compare to.
Right. And we all know, and that's, you take light into people that there are always people that have personal judgments against one way or another, and you can definitely read into some of those. And I don't want to discount those, but you also don't want to say that those are held to a higher standard. You have to look at everybody's opinion, and I'm looking for patterns. I'm applying my statistics classes to very good use right now.
Okay, well, let's open it up to public comment, please. Anybody would like to step forward, please?
Could I have Dr. Tam join me?
Of course.
Thank you very much. Morning. Henry. So we're great. So,
Could I ask you just to introduce yourself once more before
I am Mark Cushing. I'm founder and CEO of the Animal Policy Group and submitted a memorandum, which I believe is in your board packet. And I'm going to talk to Todd Tams to introduce himself.
Hi, Todd Tams, Chief Medical Officer, DCA, and a proud California veterinarian since 1978.
So I really just wanted to address two things. First of all, you have had a memorandum I wrote, which I'd be happy to entertain any questions. Thanks. So first, I'd be very happy to answer any questions any of the NBC members have regarding issues that were raised in the memorandum. And I would like to comment on the survey process. I think it'd be useful. And I think, Chair, you said it best, which is it is a start. It was designed to be a start. I think when you have a survey and you set the table, you have 9,000 plus licensees in California and 500 responded and 150, or a third roughly. 30% had a certain view. So you have 150 people responding at a cohort of 9,000. I don't think you pause. I do think it just tells you that's not a conclusive portrait to start with. But I think, surveys have limitations of the sort, and you're trying to get people to volunteer, and I respect that process. But I think to the extent there's going to be an in-depth look at an issue, that's a very complex issue, I think it's a tool. I do think one aspect of how the questions were characterized, all of us have a lot of experience in employment situations. And there's a lot of factors about how people view an employer. The problem with a survey like this, unlike the complaints that would go to the CB&B, those require a lot of factual predicates to be laid out that allow the investigators for the board and ultimately the board to adjudicate and look at it and see what really happened here. And there's no sense here to draw conclusions from as to what really happened, what the relationship was between the individual veterinarian. And by the way, you're hoping it's a veterinarian that answered, because you're not required to be to answer it, and you don't know that. You assume that it was a veterinarian, but you don't know who got the survey monkey and filled it out. I filled it out just to see if I could. And I didn't answer that as a veterinarian, obviously, because I'm not. But the point is, it's not as restrictive if you're given access to it. So I do think it'd be important, to the extent the surveys are going to be part of the board's process, or the committee's process in evaluating this for the board, to explore survey methodology even deeper in ways that would be more, that you can more readily draw conclusions from, because that's what you're trying to do, is draw conclusions from them. But I think the factor that I've been concerned with, and the groups that I work with are within the Mars Veterinary Group, which includes VCA here, Banfield, Blue Pearl, and Pet Partners. So I've been experienced for a long time with what you would call corporate practice. I also work with a lot of other veterinary agents across the country. I have yet to meet a solo practice. I've yet to meet a mom and pop 2-person practice. I've yet to meet a 3-practice group anywhere in the country that does not have economic considerations like lawyers do, which I am, like doctors do, like engineers do, like accountants do. Keeping the place open is a proper consideration. So the notion that corporations, by nature of their legal structure, somehow introduces commercialization, to use a term that was in the original memo, introduces financial considerations into veterinary practices is simply not the case. Veterinary practices always properly consider the business side. And as long as I've been involved, which is 15 years now, I've heard from every size of practice kind of an expectation that you hit a 20% of productivity target for your compensation. Well, that introduces day one. By the way, it doesn't violate any code of ethics or the Veterinary Practice Act. It introduces economics into the equation like every profession does. You know, the more pets you can care for, the better service, hopefully, the more expertise you gain, the better the practice does. The better everybody there, the vet techs, the RVTs, the assistants, everybody does better. So what I think is problematic with this approach is it's a theoretical assumption based on corporate structure changes the dynamics within a practice to introduce financial considerations or economic interests. And I don't think there's any evidence that a 2-person practice or a solo practice that hires someone that aren't thinking about the same things. And by the way, that's not illegal. And so the question, I think it read, do you feel the employment contract influenced you? Well, of course, every contract one signs in the employment context impacts you. And how you feel about that may be interesting, but it's just a legal matter, a policy matter for the board and ultimately for the legislature. I don't think you want to go there, you know, as to how you feel about something. You can have a handshake agreement with a 3-doctor practice, and you can learn that 2 doctors, husband and wife's child just got into Stanford, and they're going to face a $65,000 tuition tab, and suddenly they're a little more concerned about economics maybe. That's not illegal. That's not improper. And so the issue that you just isolate corporate ownership and say, aha, we're going to telescope in, propose legislation, ask the California legislature to, quote, fix this, come back and promulgate rules aimed at that narrow niche, absent complaints that have surfaced to the board where they believe poor judgment and misconduct occurred as a result of a corporate pressure being applied. I think that would be a mistake. But if you're going to look at that, I do hope that the NBC can take the time beyond obviously one meeting here in Riverside to take a good deal of time to really widen the net and decide how best to get at the underlying issue here and not be driven by a theory or an assumption that I don't think practice has with support. And I think if I could just pause there, Dr. Tams has had a long experience with a very, very large corporate practice here in California, so I think it'd be useful to hear from you now.
Great. Yeah, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to be here today with everyone. I've been with VCA since we started the company in late 1986. Been the chief medical officer since the beginning of the company. So my role in these 33 years has been to oversee the quality of care, to make sure that our veterinarians are supported and that we're doing the best we can for our patients, wherever we are. Whatever situation we have with our patients, always advocate for and do the best we can for our patients. We do not have any quota system. We never have. We do ever since the beginning of ECA. Our philosophy was have a great culture, be supportive to the veterinarians, provide guidance, support them as much as we can, allow them to practice the art of veterinary medicine. But do it in a box of making sure that they're practicing within standards. For example, if we merge a hospital into DCA and they're thought about a pain management program because they only have butorphanol stocked, that's a big problem because they're not going to be able to provide adequate analgesia. So how do we handle that? By education, by support, with great respect. We lead the way and say we can do better for our patients. So I submit that we've worked very hard in these 33 years in whatever state we're in, now 44, to do whatever we can to raise the bar. I lecture all over the country, all over the world. I'm always so proud to say I practice in California. People out there want to know what's going on in California. You know, we're out on the coast, we're helping lead the way, and it's great to have that in our state here in California. So just as an example, we have a veterinarian, many of you know Dr. Stephen Ettinger, who's a longtime colleague of mine. Steve just had a milestone birthday, he turned 80. What is he doing? Today he's working. He's still working. He works a few days a week as a cardiologist for VCA. The idea that we would ever tell Dr. Ettinger how he should be doing things is, you know, it's crazy. We don't dictate anything. We want doctors to grow and learn and be able to practice how they want to practice. We don't dictate on products other than we review all products that are available. We have a review board, and if we feel that products are based by science, good science, our veterinarians can use them. If a veterinarian wants to use a product, for example, a new chemotherapeutic agent that just hasn't been studied adequately enough, we should say something to them. This could be dangerous to your patient, be very careful. So we've had many former owners of hospitals that have sold to us that come back later and say, wow, the level of support we're getting here is phenomenal. I never could have done this. There are many fantastic hospitals out there that are owned privately. We've always said since the beginning, we're always going to support them. We will be helpful to anyone. When we have continuing education programs, non-VCA veterinarians are always invited to come in. We'll share anything. We're there to be supportive. I've wanted in my career to be able to do things like this. So that's our philosophy. We don't have the mandates or the quotas that people talk about. You know, we have guidelines. We even have steered clear of the word protocol. Bad word in our lexicon. It's guidelines, supporting guidelines. That's the key. So I can speak for VCA, and hopefully that sheds some light on how we do things. We have over 5,000 veterinarians. We have over 600 board certified specialists in VCA. I'm very fortunate. I'm surrounded by a wealth of talent and energy. And so that's been our goal, and that's how we want to continue running VCA.
I think that, with all due respect, we're getting away from what is important. We are talking about non-veterinary corporate ownership telling veterinarians how to practice medicine. So we cannot compare that to a private practice veterinary ownership model. We need to keep that in mind and quit comparing that to private practice ownership. Private practice ownership is veterinarian ownership. So when you're comparing the two models, please do not compare that. That is not comparable. Those are veterinarians owning the private practice. If they don't own it, then we can compare it. But it's non-veterinary ownership telling veterinarians how to practice medicine, whether you want to call them protocols or guidelines, it's still telling veterinarians how to perform medicine, how their guidelines are, what their benchmarks are. This is what we are trying to establish and say this should not exist.
Vice Chair, if I could, let me make sure I understand your distinction. The VCA is a good example. When it was publicly traded, it was obviously a corporation not owned by veterinarians. In its current capacity, it's not owned by veterinarians. It has 5,000 veterinarians. It has veterinary leadership. I'm assuming the proposed regulations and legislation council developed are aimed at corporate entities such as that, correct?
It's aimed at any non-veterinary ownership. So I don't want to name anybody because it's anybody that's a non-veterinary ownership. If that's their leadership structure and their ownership structure, then yes.
Then the point of the memo I prepared, the point I think of Dr. Tam's comments, are just such enterprises where the ownership, and by ownership we mean the legal ownership, resides in other than a veterinarian. So we're challenging, you're making the point to some extent, we're challenging a decision potentially ultimately by the CVMB to isolate looking at just that species of veterinary practices and have an assumption that something improper is going on as far as influencing veterinarians. And I don't think there's a basis for that. And no offense, but I don't think the very limited survey so far justifies that conclusion. It may be part of the step to take a look at it, but I'm also making the point that the premise of that challenge is that there's some economic factor driving a corporate entity that's going to cause them to make a very foolish decision to tell veterinarians how to practice, okay? And as opposed to any other structure that operates in the veterinary space, assuming that they don't have economic considerations that also could be at play. And I think unless you have real evidence that's before the board and ultimately shared with the MDC of that occurring, not feelings and opinions about it, but that occurred, it's a significant decision to make. And it's a significant statement to make to the public, in effect. Beware corporate practices. And by the way, there are so many practices now in this state flourishing, providing phenomenal pet care that have a corporate name to it, that are now going to be answering the question, oh my God, are you somehow not making decisions based upon your training and the condition of my cat or dog? And I don't think that is fundamentally fair, absent the evidence that's been provided in complaints to suggest that might be happening. It's that distinction you draw that I don't think is warranted unless there's a lot more evidence drawn, and I think you want to go wider. I mean, seriously.
But that's why we said this is a start. We don't disagree that this is a start.
And I do think if you were to go to the legislature, it would be an interesting proposition to say that alone among the professions, we're essentially going to argue that economic considerations don't have any place in California in the operation of a professional services business. And I think the reaction to that from the public and from just the broader community is going to be one of great surprise. And the idea that that just came into play once, quote, corporate practices appeared, and that veterinary practices in 1910 in Eureka, trying to make a living, weren't trying to make a living, I don't think that that's warranted. So, I mean, that's my challenge here. I think this is a broad-scale piece of legislation. And I complimented council in the board hearing at Davis in January. It's a very sophisticated memo. It's good analysis. That's what you hope to have from your counsel. But there's a premise to it that I think a great deal more work has to be done before that premise is given the weight that this is deserving of the board taking this to the legislature and now carve out a special set of rules for those types of practices. And I think Dr. Tam's testimony is compelling about how they do business. And if you pause and think about it, you know, how would you try to take 5,000 veterinarians and tell each one what to do? But if you didn't have some guidelines and some standards, you'd be subject to much greater criticism. Just as my wife teaches at Mayo Clinic. Let me assure you, Mayo Clinic has standards. Their doctors don't wing it, and they're pretty talented. Any more than doctors do at UC Riverside or UCLA, wherever. And I think veterinary schools that have, their doctors doing work on campus, they have standards. And the notion that what we want to do for the public in California is remove all standards set by the, quote, owner of the entity, be it a nonprofit or a for-profit, I think wouldn't stand the test of anything.
I don't believe that we're saying remove the standards. We're saying by non-veterinarians dictating what a veterinarian does. I think that's the clarification.
Let me interrupt, please. I would like to, you bring up, Mr. Cushing, a good point that was in legal counsel's memo. And if you're following along, it's the memorandum, February 2nd, 2018, page in the packet 3 of 35. And it's mentioned in a couple of places, but I'll just go to the bottom of the page, last sentence on the page. Unlike the Medical Practice Act, the Veterinary Medical Practice Act does not provide that lay entities have no professional rights, privileges, powers to practice veterinary medicine. I would like more clarification on that for my own edification and discussion by the committee.
Is that?
You're both good. Certainly one way.
And I'm sure Tara will comment. You can make a case as she has that why not put an extra layer of protection in? Okay. You can make that case, but California, like every state practice act I've looked at, and I've looked at least 45 states and actively involved. So I look at their language; it matters to me. And where you make it clear that only an individual can be licensed by the CVMP to practice veterinary medicine in the state, and where you have an explicit prohibition on anyone who's not licensed to practice veterinary medicine in the states, and I quoted that section in my memo, where you have, again, that combination of these are who can be licensed, and you're prohibited to practice veterinary medicine if you're not licensed, you simply don't have the need to dive into different forms of ownership of premises or practices to protect the public from the unauthorized practice of veterinary medicine in California. So to me, it's overkill, and if you're going to do that, I think you open the door, which has been my point all morning, to looking at a whole range of factors that can come into play, and I don't think you need to do that.
Sure.
I'm sure you've looked at the language that I proposed to the board. I've completely tracked the Medical Practice Act and provisions specific to clinics where physicians and surgeons practice. That's because the medical board does limit practice of medicine to licensed individuals. They also point to professional corporations who are organized under Moscone-Knox, which is the same as veterinary practice. You cannot practice veterinary medicine without being licensed. We have that. That's the same as the physicians and surgeons, but they also have limitations on the clinics and the owners of the facilities where the physicians and surgeons are providing service. And that is our goal, or rather what is discussed in the memo and what is reflected in the proposed legislation is the additional layer that medical practice has that veterinary medicine doesn't, and that's primarily because a veterinary premises can be owned by a non-licensed entity, just like medical clinics can be owned by general corporations. So to make sure that the corporation who owns the premises is not unduly influencing practice, just like with physicians and surgeons, I'm saying in the legislation, let's just track what they did. So we have belts and suspenders to make sure that California's animals are properly provided medical services.
Could you say, Tara, for us, how does it work? How does it work with physicians in that premise practice quandary? Can somebody other than a physician own a office in California?
Well, what you see is clinics and hospitals that are owned by a corporation where various medical professionals, healthcare professionals provide service. So what California did in various places, like under the Health and Safety Code as well as the Business and Professions Code, they drew a line between the ownership of the facility and the practitioners. So I know that various people have been provided my proposed legislation with the markers commented that provides the exact statutory location where I pulled the examples from, or the proposed statutes. So on the first page of the proposed legislation, it was a change to Business and Professions Code 4853, which is where it talks about all premises where veterinary medicine shall be registered with the board. The new section, new subdivision D, would provide that this section requiring premises to be registered does not authorize any person, corporation, or artificial legal entity other than a licensed practitioner of veterinary medicine or a veterinary corporation practicing under Moscone Knox, that's the professional corporations statute, to furnish any person or animal patient any advice, services, or treatment within the scope of veterinary licensure under this chapter. This is necessary because we've got non-licensed owners of the premises. There's confusion about whether or not premises equals the practice, separate from the practice of veterinary medicine. So you've got confusion between the location and the service. And this proposal right here is completely tracking Health and Safety Code Section 1209, which is a ban on clinic practice in medicine. So each proposal is based on an existing statute applicable to clinics where physicians and surgeons practice.
Mr. Cushing, before you answer, I just wanted to ask you about that specifically and recognize that in our world, not so much a corporate practice, but a privately owned, smaller operation in the strip mall has the building, has the premise owned by somebody other than a DVM. And what I'm understanding is that's not the case in the human world. So if we did the same as Tara's 4853D is proposing, how would that be negative?
Well, first of all, I think there's a phrase that is used a lot, so it's a truism, but often truisms are used because they're true, they're correct. They kind of state the case, which is a solution in search of the problem. You could take the entire Medical Practice Act in this state, Human Medical Practice Act, and you could say, we're doctors, they're doctors, let's just basically take that document, insert veterinary in front of each phrase, and having done a good job for California. We've apparently solved some problems where we've made sure we're doing things exactly like human medicine. I would say, be careful. Be careful going down a path that says the human medical model is the model we have to adopt. But for sure, pause before you do that, what you're doing here in this process, and your survey is part of this process. Pause before you do that to say, do we really need to do that? Have we solved the problem? I would ask the board, has anybody filed a complaint alleging that the premises owner, an accountant in Laguna Beach, practiced veterinary medicine and harmed a pet of some clinic? You could sit all day and have coffee and debate the theoretical likelihood that such mischief could occur, but that's not the basis for legislation. And the simple fact that doctors do it, and my brother's a Laguna Beach doctor, so I'd be happy to have picked on him, but The fact that doctors do something some way, it is interesting, but it's not compelling, because the state does what all states have done. The state has a very clear practice act. An individual, and there's no confusion that that's a corporation or a partnership or a limited liability company or a nonprofit. An individual may be licensed by the CVMB under certain circumstances. And no, all others are prohibited from the practice of veterinary medicine. So I don't think there's anybody today waking up in this state fearful that they're going to a veterinary clinic, large or small, and someone other than a licensed California veterinarian is taking care of their pet or not. So then we're only talking about other factors that might influence the mind and the judgment of the veterinarian as she looks at a cat or dog, or a ferret, or a snake, or a horse, whomever, or whatever. And that's an interesting speculation, but it's speculation. And so I think you can say, well, don't worry, this is a practice that doctors use, fine. That addressed a certain need that they had, but hopefully it addressed a need. The only need here that I've heard is that, well, we don't have this, wouldn't it be good to have that extra layer of protection? And I don't think legislatures are here to add extra layers of protection in otherwise clear circumstances unless problems have surfaced and people go, you know what, we've looked at this now and there's reason to address this with an extra layer. And I just put that out. If the process goes forward, and obviously I'm just one person advocating here, I just think it needs to be a very careful and thorough and not a rushed process to determine that this is what we need to do. That's all. I mean, so I understand Council's point. It's a clear point, but it's a view that I think is a problem in search of a solution, or solution not in search of a problem. Sorry, I don't think that's good policy.
So what we're saying here, I think, is basically that there's concern among some people that there may be undue influence on the individual veterinarian practicing, and you're assuring us that at least the corporations you work with are not doing that. What is the harm in this legislation?
I think the harm, number one, if you limit it in the way that the proposal limits it to, as you term it, corporations not owned or controlled by veterinarians, however you term that. I think the harm is the premise of it is that this must be going on. This must be occurring out there. This must be a problem that warrants the California legislature's interest and time. And the legislature here, as you know, has a fair amount on its plate. It's a statement to the world. It really is a statement to the world to beware corporate practices. Be on guard. Why would you say that? Because this legislation uniquely targets those practices of veterinary medicine with the implication that improper considerations are at play in the treatment of pets. That stigma, I don't think is fair to assign to corporate practices, absent evidence that that's going on. So that's a wrong right there. And I think you have seriously a concern with the public. And then I think if you get into the weeds about the draft legislation, the involvement in employment contracts, and I will assure you that if you go forward, you're going to want to have a number of good California employment lawyers here guiding you on the problems with the way the legislation is structured as to the interference with or the assumptions about certain employment agreements. And you want to do that very thoughtfully. And you want to do that before the legislature gets hold of it. Because they won't spend, as you will, multiple sessions. They'll have the 2-hour hearing and reach a political conclusion. And then we'll go, oops, we went a little far, didn't we? So I think before you get to the legislature, into the weeds, you want to be very careful with it. But I go back to the point, why create that cloud in the first place from a theoretical concern? Absent, we've got a problem. And I think you can look at 49 other states for guidance and say, is this a problem in veterinary medicine today? Pet owners, are they complaining about it? Is this why so many California practitioners that have great practices welcome in a corporate owner? Not just for retirement, but because they believe it's going to be good for their patients. I mean, you look at all the factors and go, where is the fire burning here that we need to put out? And that's where I think the wrong is. And that's not a technical wrong, but I think it's a fundamental wrong pursuing this answer.
Well, I think you're here representing the corporation, and we need to be able to say we have to represent veterinarians as well as the consumer. And right now, the veterinarians take the brunt of that. They are the ones that are taking what you are saying is they're looking at, oh, corporations are the ones that we put legislation out there. Right now, the veterinarians are the ones that are taking that and saying, well, we have to do this because we're having to run this test. And you say that we can't say feel in this, but that's how veterinarians are obviously feeling because they said this. So whether you want to look at this as not being representative or not, there are veterinarians that feel this way. So feel may not be okay, but they feel this way. So we do have to look at that. And you want to represent the corporation, but we have to look at this. They obviously feel this way. So you don't want the corporation taking it, but the veterinarian is taking that perspective from the client right now. They're being represented that way. So it's one or the other, but how about we find a middle ground for both? And I think that's what we are trying to do. And I think that we have to find what's best for the consumer. And I think that's our role. And that's what we're trying to do. And that way, everybody comes out ahead.
First of all, I'm sorry, let me ask Terry to respond and then you're next. Sure.
I just wanted to point out, you made a comment as to what the other 49 states are doing. I just wanted to note that the proposed regulations that were included with my memo, I took from Texas. There are Texas regulations aimed at curtailing management service organization contracts where the corporation comes in, offers management services, and ends up affecting the veterinary practice in the products that it stocks at the veterinary premises. So there are other states addressing the stuff that is before this committee right now and before the board.
I do a lot of work in Texas, and it will be one of few areas where California takes an cue from Texas on legislation. But I think that legislation is not necessary, and it wasn't driven by a record. And it's subject to the same flaws here. It was not driven by a record of problems or issues. It was in my view then, as would be here today, a theoretical concern that isn't required because they make it very clear who can practice veterinary medicine and who can't. And yes, the board exists to protect the public. I respect that greatly. And the public, pet owners, animal owners on the production side, and so forth, they have not surfaced, they have not stood up and said or brought to the board complaints that bad medicine is being practiced by corporate practices in any way hinting that the reason is that corporations are driving medical considerations for other than good medical practice. And that's, so it's not your job to protect veterinarians from the public. It's not your job to protect veterinarians working for nonprofits, corporations, whatever. It's your job to protect the public, and that's what all vet med boards are empowered to do. I respect that, but I don't think it will be in the public's benefit in this state to create a cloud over those many practices now, growing every day, that have a corporate ownership structure, unless you have real evidence that bad medicine is being practiced because of that. And by the way, you have a lot of samples you could follow. You could take a look at the complaints against a practice 10 years prior to the sale and the complaints 10 years after. And you know what? If there isn't an increase, then that's a conclusion I'd want to think about, that there apparently isn't a difference, that the UC Davis grads that were practicing there before are as ethical as they were 10 years ago. And they're not And if a corporation tried to do otherwise, they'd leave. And by the way, it's a phenomenal market to leave in right now. If they raised their hand and said, I don't want to be here, they'd have probably 5 practices say, come practice for me today, and we'll be happy to have you. So it's not like they're in a system that they couldn't get out of if that was even occurring.
Dr. Lasserchuk, I'm sorry. Question for you. Other than the perceived stigma that this would potentially have towards corporate medicine, how would this proposed legislation affect your employment contracts and your practice of veterinary medicine in any way?
There's 3 sets of materials for council. There was a memorandum background, there was draft legislation, and then there were draft rules. The rules, as you all know, just because you're advisory to the board, the rules get more detailed, more specific, and often more onerous in the application. Legislation is a little more like 5,000 feet above ground. So if you go through the restrictions on, because I'll concede, if this was simply making it clear that no one is to influence an individual licensed veterinarian's medical judgment with the patient, no one, their mother, their grandmother, their corporate owner, whomever, their best friend. If you want to have some restriction to make it perfectly clear, I don't think you need it, you could do that. But this goes on to spell out measures on how you make extra sure that that doesn't happen. And there's a great deal of, to go through page, if we all have the same thing, look at page 10, it's a good example. We start with page 9. Page 9, and this sounds very legalistic, but 4918A and small a, 4919 small a, begin to set the stage for how you regulate contracts in those situations, which takes the board into, I think, new territory. So you spell that out in some detail with lots of complications here. And that's why I'm saying, not in a brief hearing today, but if you're going to go down that path, take the time with the MDC process you have, whether it's August or November, take the time to bring in knowledgeable California lawyers. I'm licensed in 5 states. I'm not licensed here. I'm not representing that I am. But bring in some knowledgeable California lawyers to look at this language to see if it creates more problems. Legislation, lawyers exist because legislation has unknown consequences. Things you think make great sense, make great sense in hearings like this, and in the real world you go, oh my God, we didn't need to do that. But then the regulations proposed, you have to take a look at. Page 10, very detailed set of A through E, 1 through 8 specifications of what can and can't be. Turn to the next page, 11. I could go through each one. I think it'd be, frankly, a waste of your time today to do that. But I'm saying bring in people to look at this. And this is an extensive effort to oversee and quote, purposefully interfere with the contractual relationship. Purposeful meaning we think we have some higher, greater purpose to do that. But understand, this isn't ambitious. This is an expansive piece of legislation. This is not a limited. Council's first page is very limited. We want to clarify ownership rules and who can practice and not. But it doesn't stop there. So if we'd had a proposal, I think, that just said that, you'd probably hear my arguments about stigma and say, well, so not so important, maybe not that big a problem. But this goes much further. So to answer your question, I'd be happy to address that later in writing. I think even better, smarter employment lawyers should take a look at that because that's a serious concern.
Does that answer your query? Yeah, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that too. How you perceive this would affect your contractual relationship.
We can help make that available. And I think that's a fair request. I think that'd be appropriate.
Yeah, I recognize.
Yes, my name is Bonnie Lutz. I'm an attorney. I represent veterinarians. I defend veterinarians in administrative actions. That's all I do. I don't really have a dog in this hunt, but I wanted to make a couple of comments. The comment was made that there's no problem in the other 49 states. The issue is that in many of those states, they're what we call PC states, which specifically state that the only people that can own a veterinary practice is a veterinary corporation or a veterinarian, and the statutes and regulations are really specific. I have them all if anybody is interested in those. And again, I don't really have a dog in the hunt, but I just wanted to point out that there are states that have thought that it was serious enough that they restrict ownership to veterinarians or veterinary corporations. The other thing, as far as the proposed regulations, they're not only effective in Texas, but in Louisiana. And so Louisiana actually copied the Texas regulations about MSOs, and I think that there will be other states that will follow as well. In my capacity defending veterinarians, I have many times defended veterinarians that have said to me, I was told to do this. Now, I will say as a caveat, not VCA and not Petco, because I also do some work for Petco. Other corporate ownership, and from where I sit, I'm more concerned about the new up-and-coming corporate owners. I'm not so concerned about VCA. VCA has been around for a long time, and you seem to be doing things right in all the states, but I am seeing other up-and-coming corporate owners that are not doing it the way VCA is doing it, and they're clueless, and they are putting restrictions and demands on their veterinarians, and I've actually had clients that have said to me, I had to do that. I mean, can't you just tell the board I had to do it? And I say, no, because it's your license. That's who they're going after. So I think that this is a bigger picture than just talking about VCA. So
I'd like to add to that sage point that the term corporation is not a singular entity, obviously, and yours being, it's not the biggest, but pretty big, undoubtedly does things differently than others. I don't know how many there are, probably more than 20, less than 100, but they all aren't Banfield or PCA or Pet Partners. Many are much smaller, and let's do this. Let me ask if you have a reply to this, Lutz, and then I'd like to call for a break for 15 minutes.
It used to be 50-50. A number of states, and that's not the issue here, a number of states do not allow veterinary practice to be owned by a corporation. Those are the circumstances where management service agreements are utilized, and they're legal, they're upheld. And each of those states has only an individual can practice veterinary medicine, and you're prohibited to do so otherwise. So there's a lot of, some states that just never got comfortable that a corporation owned it. But the basic rule was the same in all 50 states, that an individual can practice veterinary medicine and a corporation cannot. And in those states, Colorado is the most recent, or one of the most recent, that authorize corporations to own veterinary practices. They do not authorize corporations to practice veterinary medicine. There's no state that authorizes corporations to practice veterinary medicine, and any corporation that tried to do that would be sanctioned by a board doing its job and would have no defense other than that the facts weren't as claimed. But basically, no state licenses corporations to practice veterinary medicine, or licenses partnerships, or licenses, that's just not done. It's an individual license you've earned, and the board protects the public in that way. But you've heard obviously a lot of comments, and I don't need to take them on.
After the break, we can take a break.
Okay, let's do that.
Thank you both.
Let's take 15 minutes, please. Dr. Tam's opportunity. I think he was going to make a comment over what we had been discussing.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the commentary about veterinarians feeling that there's people dictating how they're going to practice. When I first graduated from Ohio State back in 1977, my first job was mixed animal practice in Vermont. I went up there, and the employer, 2-doctor practice, I would go out on farm calls, and he'd say, you're going out to the Moyer farm, and here's what's going on with a cow, and here's what I want you to do. And I remember driving up thinking, wait a minute, he didn't even examine the cow, and I'm being told how I have to practice. I was under shackles in that situation. You can only use these vaccines, and why didn't the vaccine just hurt for this? Very dictatorial. So I got out of it. And I came to California and did an internship. I thought I needed to change my career a little bit. We merge hospitals into VCA where veterinarians say, including the state of California, where some of the associate veterinarians say, thank goodness, we want to do so much more. We have not been able to do it. We couldn't get product X, or we couldn't do this. Our employer said we had to do it this other way. And there were limitations on pain management, so that happened. So they really try to support them. But yeah, the idea that we have veterinarians that are in fear of losing their job because of we don't want people to leave. We want people to stay, and our culture is to try to help them in any way we can. So appreciate the board taking time in the committee to work on this issue, and I appreciate the comments, the opportunity to comment on behalf of VCA. And any questions that you have, I'd be happy to answer anything if anybody has any questions. As far as the technicians, I love the fact that we have RVTs here. We have an initiative right now in VCA. Our biggest focus is improving tech training at the specialty hospitals, at the general practices, the primary care hospitals. Just as in human medicine, nurses are the lifeblood of human medicine. Without nurses, where would we be? And we believe the same thing about technicians. So I'm glad to see that you're here. Going forward, we want to do more and more to enhance the profession in that way.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment, there are 20 PC states. I just got information from my office. So 20 states do not allow ownership of veterinary practices unless it's a veterinarian or veterinary corporation. And then some of those also have other requirements above and beyond that.
Thank you both.
Mr. Cushing, anything else you want to add?
No, just in response, in those states that don't allow the ownership, that's when the management service agreements can be employed and are often employed by the corporate practice.
Anybody else on the committee have questions about the topic? Any other public members not already spoken for? Okay, well, we're clearly not resolving this today. What do you think about where you are on the survey and where we're going?
Well, I think this gives us another round of information. I don't want to say another clear guidance because I don't think nothing's clear. But I think that what we need to do is, I think that what they're asking for is more information. So I think what we would like is more information as well. And so that's what we need to do is get more information and more specific information.
So in the form of continuing that survey, anything else on the docket for either expansion of that survey or something else? That's a survey of these 9,000 some licensees. Okay, and then you distinguish them at the first and second question as to working in corporate practices versus not. So there are a lot of people who end their survey in the second question. Meaning they work in non-corporate practices.
Correct. We can be a little more clear and more statistically significant on this one.
Good segue to what Dr. Ducey's mentioned. I don't know that we need to pay a statistician, but it would be nice to get a bigger percentage of those 9,000, whether they currently work for a corporation or not, because lots of people have more than one job, believe it or not.
No.
Newsflash. Okay. Let's then move on. We clearly will be bringing this discussion of corporate practice back at the next meeting in July. So, agenda item number 6, discussion and development of guidelines for discussion of cannabis with veterinary clients. This is a subcommittee of myself and Dr. Warner, and I'm going to let her take the ball.
Thank you, Dr. Pollard. Just a couple of general statements I think that Dr. Pollard and I have. We know a lot more about cannabis and the cannabis issue now than we did 4 months ago. However, we're not going to pretend it's a very complicated issue. As many of the people here, many people are more experts than we would ever pretend to be. But having said that, I think that if those of you who were here in the January 22nd meeting know kind of what we had put forward and what we were charged with doing was giving guidelines to veterinarians to go forward and what they can and cannot do in terms of staying on the right side of the veterinary medical board. So not everyone will have the guidelines that we had presented at the 22nd, January 22nd meeting, but you will have in your packet the guidelines that we have proposed at this meeting. We again have stayed very similar to what the medical board has done with their guidelines concerning cannabis. So you'll find the preamble that we have rewritten somewhat based on feedback from the committee, background, and then we do have citing of the bill, etc. Then we get into the actual guidelines, and again, this is going to be somewhat similar to what we had put forward with some changes made based on feedback from the committee, and also based on our continued research and reading, studying, and feedback from the public. And we did this time want to add in, again, our concern is that we make this as straightforward and easy for veterinarians to use. And so we thought that there would be some additional information that if we were veterinarians coming to the Veterinary Medical Board website and looking at those guidelines, what would we need to make our decisions? So adding in the farm bill, as well as some definitions, because again, this is a very complicated issue. And you'll also find in your packet some hyperlinks to with references to some FDA, including a summarization of the statement from Commissioner Gottlieb. And I think that is about all that.
The last item is the legislation,
Yeah.
215. And highlighted at the very end of it is the amendments to 4883 and then the new section 4884. So that's the packet. My sense from the last meeting was hearing comments from the committee, especially from the public, with what was in that packet. We wanted we collectively know more about CE, continuing ed on cannabis. We wanted more specifics, probably more than what the Veterinary Medical Board at this point in time is able to provide regarding things like dose, toxicity, efficacy. Many of you, as Meg alluded to, certainly know much more about this than others, and we're going to learn that. Let me start with the committee. If we just start with the guidelines Dr. Warner referred to initially, preamble, background, and then what I like to refer to as just the meat and potatoes of it, the bullet points here. Is there anything in there that anybody has an objection to? And then we'll go to any addition to the changes. Dr. Warner?
The last bullet point
periodic reevaluation of the patient in accordance with good veterinary practice to ascertain the appropriateness of the client's continued administration of cannabis to the patient. It sort of seems like it's allowing there, it's encouraging the use of cannabis. Before that it said it's not that way, but it's, I guess, were these just taken straight out of the physicians?
No, I would say some version, so some of them to some degree were, some of them were rather adamant. I can't speak to that particular one.
I don't think that, I think the idea of the statement came from the medical board, but it's probably not the exact wording. Proposed change?
Wordsmith,
Christine.
Whoops. You need to be able to have something in there that states. I agree with your idea behind this, and so you have to have something in there that states you're reevaluating this patient, and it says very clearly you're not recommending or prescribing this by the veterinarian, but you are reevaluating this and saying that this patient is still healthy and or healthy is doing okay. Because if somebody else, I mean, if this pet is getting cannabis, if it's just like any other type of medication, it needs to be under the care of a veterinarian. So,
what if we left out that she just said ascertain the appropriateness of therapy, of current therapy, and left out any statement concerning cannabis?
It's exactly what I was going to suggest, to ascertain the appropriateness of the therapeutic regime with we wanted to wordsmith it and leave out any reference to cannabis in this bullet.
I would just add that my thought in this bullet point was analogous to anything else. Though the cannabis isn't prescribed by the veterinarian here, it is a medication. You know, pick another over-the-counter, non-prescribed entity. What could go wrong if the client started giving coconut oil at whatever volume or anything else that similarly would not be prescribed, but not illegal or unpermitted. So I'm sure we've all heard examples that should see the light of day. But if I had a pet on a prescribed medication, thyroid medication, propofol, and say, I'm going to likely do periodic lab work to monitor. That was my intent in
I think that was
what this means. I don't
just
know what the test
to be
is.
certain that we were including reevaluation of any discussion. So
I agree. You don't know. It doesn't matter if it's a prescribed therapeutic medication or not, or over the counter. It's reevaluation. You're letting them know that seeing a veterinarian is important. That's a guideline. So no matter what they're giving, like you said, no matter what it is.
My sense in the exam room is, I'd only be guessing, as I'm sure we all would, about what percentage of our clients are using it. And then breaking that down a little further, what percentage of our clients are using it without our knowledge. I think that's actually small, because I think the majority of people that are using it want it to work, and they want our input, so they are going to say something. I don't think there are that many people that are hating it, as it were. And so, I'll leave it at
and just an additional thought, I think because we are going to be documenting that there has been this discussion, I think it's a good reminder of, we're not just going to discuss and forget. We're going to, I think, the point that you're making, it's in the it's in our medical records that we've discussed with them about cannabis. So let's just make sure that we continue to remember that that's part of what the owner is doing.
And that reminds me of something that I read in not a mainstream veterinary journal, but one of the off the beat track ones, let's just say. And an individual who was very knowledgeable, self-proclaimed about cannabis, has a lot of letters behind their name, proposed that there be a second set of books, as it were, only in the medical discussion context. Meaning, and this was dated in January of 19, so after 2215 had passed, well after. And it was written with the intent that, well, we don't know what the big bad veterinary medical board is going to do, so we don't want to document it. And I think that's wrong on many levels. And I think the legislation gives us permission, not just to discuss it, but to document it. And I think it should be in our best interest as practitioners to document it. Tara,
Following up on that last bullet, with Dr. Wanderhouse's concern about how that last bullet on page 3 reads, it does appear to be more of an instruction to the veterinarian versus the advice that the veterinarian is given, which is the essence of these bullet points. So perhaps it's more of a reminder to tell the patient or tell the client that the animal patient should be reevaluated. I mean, I think we need to restructure it so it's the need
It's a
for
direction to the client.
yes, rather than a direction to the veterinarian. Yeah, it shouldn't be, hey, remember to follow up on this. It's tell the client, please, if you can use this, bring the animal back in for reevaluation. That's
Stuart, the concern I have is with the wording ascertaining the appropriateness of the client's continued administration of cannabis, because one might construe from that that even though the client made the initial decision that when the animal is brought back, the veterinarian is validating that appropriateness. So I would suggest changing that wording so that the patient is evaluated perhaps in conjunction with the client's decision to use cannabis.
Let's not leave this point then before we kind of wordsmith it right now. So something along the line of the bullet point immediately preceding. Reminder to the client that cannabis is not being recommended or prescribed. Reminder to the client that periodic reevaluation in accordance with good veterinary practice. Thoughts?
What do you think, Tara?
I start to get concerned with any termination of the veterinarian as to good veterinary practice. I think that does kind of follow to ascertaining appropriateness. At what point does it start to look like a prescription or a recommendation? So, we just need to tell the client, if you do this, then please make sure to bring the animal patient back in for reevaluation. I think, I don't know that it's appropriate for the veterinarian to have a determination at the time of the initial conversation when the animal should be brought back in. If you started today, I recommend that you come back in 3 months and we'll see how they're doing.
the whole line here, it's a discussion, not a recommendation.
Let me make sure I understand. You said that would be an appropriate advisement, and you need to come back in 3 months. Okay.
That might be, but I think when we start to talk about good veterinary practice in relation to when the client needs to return the animal patient for reevaluation, that sounds like more than the veterinarian just monitoring the animal because of the client medicating the animal. It starts to sound like the veterinarian is recommending a specific treatment plan. So I think if we can just narrow it so that it's just advising the client of the need for periodic reevaluation. Yep.
What about even a more general comment about reminding the owner that all medications and supplements should be monitored by the veterinarian?
Agreed. So this one isn't that tough. Let's come up with one.
Yeah.
Periodic, reminder to client that periodic reevaluation of a patient who is taking any medication or supplement.
Can you add the effects of anything, or is that still crossing the border? So is that still?
Well, I think that if we're just telling the client to keep an eye out for effects, abnormal side effects, bringing the animal in, that's appropriate because we're concerned about how the animal patient is doing. We're just not setting up a specific return plan.
You can still say the effects of supplements and use that terminology, because then you're still addressing the effects of anything they're doing.
I think you need to back it out a step further, and something as vague as what a directive as evaluating the response to therapy, and that would be all inclusive and not just related to cannabis.
And perhaps not even other supplements, because it could be implied that we don't need to reevaluate that pet that isn't taken in, which obviously isn't right. I like that therapy. Other thoughts?
But aren't we, this is going in the cannabis section. So I don't think we need to be so worried about that, right? I mean, this is going guidelines for cannabis. So we're worried about that, but this is going in the cannabis section. So we're worried about all of these other areas. We don't need to make implications that all these other therapies, this is going in a section for guidelines for cannabis.
Sure.
So in reading all of the other bullets, we already have things like the side effects and signs of overdose, things for them to look at, or look for possible interactions with other treatments. Great. What I'm thinking is we could just end it with, because this is advice given to the client, the importance of periodic reevaluation of the patient. Period. We're just letting them know it's important to reevaluate the animal patient, because this is all about cannabis use.
Right.
Agreed. So I wrote a reminder to client that periodic reevaluation of patient is important.
I cut that down even further so that it's just the importance of periodic reevaluation of the patient. Because this sentence like the one above it. It's not really a reminder, it's just flat out telling, having a discussion of the importance of periodic reevaluation of the patient. Okay, so one more time. The last bullet on page 3, with the stricken and inserted new bullet, the importance of periodic reevaluation of the animal patient. Actually, strike animal, just patient.
Any other committee concerns, comments? Public. Please.
Are we speaking to the whole document or just this one?
Please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Paul Hansberry, Loving Green Legally. I'm wondering if we're addressing the entire document or just this bullet point at this time.
Your choice.
Well, I'd like to discuss the bullet points for the guidelines for this one section here. The first bullet point talks about the variability of the quality and safety of cannabis products, pesticide contaminations, potentially harmful co-ingredients, xylitol and chocolate. I understand that there are other things that are not necessarily a problem for humans, like chocolate, or it might be catastrophic for an animal. But I want to stress that further in the document, we talk about the safety of the product. And one of the things that was left out in the definitions was testing. You may or may not have any idea how extensive and how high a scrutiny cannabis products are. It costs $1,200 to test a batch of cannabis product or a batch of cannabis. They test everything from a laundry list of pesticides to heavy metals to molds and natural pathogens. This isn't necessarily true with hemp products, but with cannabis products it is. We're not talking about hemp right now, but they don't fall under the same kind of scrutiny. So cannabis products, as far as their safety, with regards to, say, pesticides or molds or contaminants, they go through a very rigorous and highly scrutinized testing process and very expensive. So I don't think that warning is as warranted as something like chocolate. It's the second bullet point. It says no federal or state agency oversees the standardization of cannabis concentrations for use on animals. That's because they're illegal on state and federal level. Currently, all veterinary cannabis products are illegal. You can't have the products, so how can you standardize something that shouldn't exist? So that leads them to have to go to adult use products currently. The side effects are signs of overdose or toxicity. This is taken from the ASPCA, a national organization that has to deal with this subject on a national level. Safeguarding cannabis products from other pets and human exposure. That's valid. You should have to do that because there's a lot of things that are happening.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to not get too deep before we break it down. Go back to the side effects. So your concern is that putting in this list of side effects taken, and you are correct, from the ASPCA is not appropriate for pets in California. They have different side effects.
I'm sorry, I was getting a little bit ahead of myself. These, along with that, because the point I was trying to make, and I didn't state, and I apologize for that, is that this is California, and that the benefits, we've known about medical cannabis for over 20 years now, and whether it's Dr. Google or the bud tender, or if it's for humans. We've known about some of the benefits. We've all heard stories about benefits. And all of these bullet points here speak to the dangers. I think it's equally important that the veterinarian, when asked to discuss this, also have some information about the benefits, because this is the California reality. It's not the national reality, it's not the FDA, it's not the ASPCA, this is the California Veterinary Medical Board. And the people in California are a little bit more aware of the benefits, and they're going to ask their veterinarian about the benefits if they do. You were speaking earlier about the people that are using it that are not talking to the veterinarians. There was a presentation at the Veterinary Medical Board that I was attending that was given by UC Davis, where they were talking to 2,000 people. Now, this is just 2,000 people that were willing to take the survey, which represents millions, I would assume. And they said that of those 2,000 people, a very small percentage talked to their veterinarian about it. They relied on Dr. Google or the bud tender or their family member or somebody they heard something about that, or they're just winging it on their own. So talking about the benefits, because they'll come in and have heard about the benefits, and then they want to talk with their trusted veterinarian for professional advice, they should have some information about the benefits as well as the toxicity and dangers.
Excuse me, Karen?
So this bulletin list is just documentation that may be included in the medical record about potential risks. Above that, it says documentation of discussion should include the indication, appropriateness, and safety of the use of cannabis for the indicated condition. So it seems to me that that documentation could include benefit. This list, on the other hand, is just, hey, heads up, you should, you could document in your medical record these other items that the client might need to know about dosing an animal patient without any veterinary prescription or recommendation.
I understand. Here's my concern, is that the veterinarian will inevitably, whether they want to include medical cannabis in their practice or not, will inevitably get these questions. And I'm certain that they will get them more and more and more. These are the guidelines that they're being asked. This is all that they can talk about. And this is all the education that they're getting, unless they take a continuing education course. So if this is the only reference that they have for cannabis, and they're getting questions from their clients, this is kind of one-sided.
I'm going to interrupt you, because I think what you just said isn't correct, and it isn't what our intent or the VMB's intent is. This isn't the whole universe of cannabis advice for veterinarians. The concept of veterinarians seeking out CE is a great idea, and probably more necessary, and will become more necessary the further down this road we get. But at this point, my sense from your appreciation for what is in front of you, or lack thereof, is you want more than what is written here. And some of the more restrictive or cautionary items you want to be dumbed down a little bit.
Not necessarily.
Well, when I hear you say these are the side effects nationally that the ASPCA has to deal with, and California pets, California owners, I think I hear you giving more credit, if you will, to a group that isn't uniform.
Again, I will apologize one more time when I stated that I didn't follow through. Of course, everything on this list and the dangers, they should definitely be warned about toxicity. They should be told about the sensitivities, the signs to look for. all these things, they're absolutely true. My concerns were that they were one-sided. They were talking about just the toxicity, just the problems and the dangers, and they weren't giving direction about how to, even in a broad sense, without going to a continuing education course. If they decide that they're not going to do that, this would have some kind of direction as to what the potential benefits might be as well, if this is all the information that they're going to get.
Chrissy.
I think the concern right now is that the benefits are, I don't want to say vague, but are new and relatively unknown and still being proven. So we can't put in guidelines that are due January 2020 the benefits. So that is the veterinarian's duty to continue an education to learn those benefits. But we can say that that is their job to learn the benefits and to have those benefit discussions with their individual clients, because we are not here to dictate how a veterinarian should practice medicine.
Understood.
We just had that discussion. So what we are saying is that's their job. They have to determine that, and they need to say what is best in discussion-wise, how to move forward. And we are saying we do know there are these risks. Those have been proven. Those have been documented. Moving forward, this is new. So that is going to change. That is progressive. And we are still learning.
Dr. Watkins?
So I looked on the AAVSB for the race-approved continuing education topics on marijuana, and there were 4. All 4 of them talked about the danger only, the risk of, the dangers of. And the survey that you mentioned by UC Davis, the veterinarian who did that survey is actually sitting in the back of the room.
Yes.
And so that's when Paul's done, maybe we can hear from Dr. Payton too.
Okay. Sorry, Stuart.
I wouldn't argue against any of the points that you've raised about the benefits, but the concern I would have if language were put in is how a veterinarian could make any statements about that without understanding dosing or being able to refer to any types of studies. And the concern on top of that is that when a veterinarian talks about the benefits, if someone were to extrapolate those in terms of consumer or human products, there's a big gap there.
Well, I think every document, including the one that's included from Mr. Gottlieb, I believe his name is, from the FDA, is that these are called potential benefits. That there have been studies, there are thousands and thousands of studies on PubMed, if you just search for cannabis, on the benefits and as well as the risks. And I just would like to see these bullet points, if this is all that the veterinarian is going to see, because they choose, maybe they're ambivalent or they don't want it, but they still need to answer the questions that are going to be coming to them, that this would be a bit more balanced is all that I'm suggesting.
Well, to follow up on that, my sense is the way this is going to happen in the clinical world, January 1st of this year, we have permission to discuss. January 1st of 2020 may be a very different scene. So we can only deal with 2215 right now. You mentioned SB 627 in your introduction. That might be the topic of the next meeting. So the veterinarian who is going to discuss cannabis with the client that brings it up, if this is the only source of information that they have, my sense is they probably aren't going to be very qualified to discuss cannabis. And so those people who are going to do what they do if they want to learn about veterinary acupuncture or anesthesia to a different degree. They're going to get educated. And
we can't mandate that. And I think the way it's going to work from the client's perspective is, just like it works now, people don't come to see me to get acupuncture done because I don't know how to do acupuncture. And so the market is going to decide. It's fast going to get out there that there are people who are more qualified, however you want to define it, in cannabis than others.
If you were to practice acupuncture tomorrow on an animal, would you be disciplined by the board if they found out?
I don't think so, because there isn't there's a certification CBA, but I can do lots of things that I don't have a specific certification for. So the short answer is no.
So you don't need to be trained in order to perform acupuncture on an animal?
Well, I think that's a different question. I wouldn't do it because I'm not trained.
Okay, well, we're getting a little, my head is getting a little off topic here. But what I'm saying is that people, if they choose to incorporate this and get that information and take the continuing education, they will be better informed and more qualified to discuss.
Agreed.
Okay? However, the people that do not, the veterinarians, the health professionals that do not, may not think that it's medicine. They may not want to involve themselves or take the time to investigate these continuing education courses. However, they will still get the questions. And isn't there a responsibility for them to give accurate answers that is balanced if this is the only information that they're going to be getting?
So you keep going back to if this is the only information. And you could extend that argument to any therapy. There's still plenty of veterinarians that are using NSAIDs and steroids concurrently. Bad idea. And it isn't because they couldn't or shouldn't know better. That's on the veterinarian. Let me ask you, if you wouldn't mind, do you have any other points to make in the following bullet points that you haven't addressed yet?
If we're just talking about the bullet points, I couldn't agree more with what you come up with for the last one. That if it's part of the treatment, that needs to be monitored. And this is the cannabis section, the cannabis guidelines. So, yes, to ascertain the appropriateness. Again, if there was language about benefits, and there may be different things that you learn in the continuing education course where maybe a one-to-one ratio of THC to CBD might be more appropriate than just CBD. And those sorts of things would help. And where do you stop with this?
It's not the Veterinary Medical Board's task to educate veterinarians. It's their task, it's our task to protect consumers and to adhere to the BPA. And I don't see ever, no matter how far down this road we end up, I don't see ever guidelines saying this drug in this proportion is good for X, Y, Z. I just don't see that happening. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea because it could be extended to any other therapy too. And I just don't think that's going to happen. I'm sorry.
I think that's all I have on these bullet points. And again, the service animals, that's absolutely true, but it's also true for a number of other drugs as well.
Agreed. Let's do this. Let's hear from Ms. Lutz, and then I'd like to take a break for lunch. And clearly, we're not going to be done with this, and we'll reconvene after lunch.
Bonnie Lutz, I'm an attorney. I just had a couple of comments. Backing up from the bullet points, I think, again, we talked about the word appropriateness when we were looking at that last bullet point. I would recommend that you remove it from where it says document of discussion should include the indication appropriateness. I can just see appropriateness being, morphed into recommendation. So, I mean, I would recommend that you remove that. As far as the benefits, again, if you put benefits there, you're essentially recommending. So, I'm looking at it from the perspective of, the first clients that come afoul of this whole situation and trying to defend them and then looking at this document. So I would rather not have benefits there so that they don't feel like they have to give the benefits, because then they're actually recommending them.
Okay, it is 12:18. Let's break for lunch and reconvene at 1:30, please. Good, exactly where we left off. A couple of members in the audience had a couple of points they wanted to follow up on, so we want to open the floor again to public members to continue where we left off this morning.
Do I turn this on?
It's on. It's good.
Thank you very much. Susan Tiddum, good afternoon. As the chair said earlier, things will change, perhaps sooner than we think. With that being said, certainly you may not see the ability to recommend immediately. However, just as one of the members beautifully and sort of theatrically demonstrated at the last meeting, a veterinarian may not recommend this item, this item, this item, this item. I'm not saying anything about the fifth item. So, that being said, the obvious work that went into the draft document has some holes. And I think in the interest of the profession and the interest of animals, we might look at just a couple of the bullet points a little more closely. As the previous speaker mentioned, in terms of regulatory agencies, hemp and cannabis are tested and regulated in very different manners. And it's important that pet owners know this. And the only people that are going to find out from are medical professionals. They're not going to find that out from a retail salesperson, from Dr. Google, as the previous speaker said.
Why would retail salespeople not know that?
Well, and I'll speak anecdotally here, but it is anecdotal information based on many years of experience. Some veterinary products that are available now are hemp-based, and that is attractive in many ways. It is attractive because it's easier to obtain. It's a crop that is grown differently. It's traditionally used to make fiber and various oils, but it can also be processed mechanically to make various medicines. However, it's somewhat of an isolate, and what that means is that the cannabis flowers may be very rich in CBD, they may be rich in THCs, they may carry a large measure of the 113 plus THC compounds, so that some medicine makers will be combining different kinds of flowers to achieve different ratios to treat specific illnesses. So going back to your question, many of the more accessible products for pets are hemp-based. And it's really important that we let pet owners know that while there are many responsible hemp growers, there are many who are less responsible. And anecdotally, in our review last year of many hemp-based products, we saw distressingly high levels of.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the question is, why would the people that sell the stuff know about the testing differences?
Because they're retail salespeople, and as our corporate person so beautifully explained, there are financial imperatives in a retail establishment. So I will leave that point. Just please be aware that those kinds of issues where we're looking at hemp-based products, specifically targeted at pets, hemp is not tested, it is not subject to the same very, very high standard of testing that cannabis-based products are. And that's just the reality. And pet owners are not going to find that out other than from their veterinarian. Also, it's worth noting that there are a host of medicines that are used in veterinary practice and sometimes in human practice as well. Gabapentin, tramadol, prednisone, phenobarbital. Many of them, if used inappropriately, if administered inappropriately, place the service animal and the human handler at risk, just as you have indicated. But this is exactly why we need to, if not educate veterinarians, because that may not be the mission of the board, at least promote CE, and eventually, hopefully, give veterinarians the ability to prescribe, because any medicine can be used either inadvertently in the wrong ratio. It's really.
Sorry, we're not going to be prescribing, at least not today.
At least not today.
So you mentioned some concerns about the bullet points.
Yes. With regard to terpenes, I think that's on page 5 of the draft document. The terpenes are the aromatic metabolites found in many plants, and certainly found in cannabis. And those terpenes are indeed part of what we call the entourage effect, all the different parts of the plant working together. However, THC-rich flowers have over 113 cannabinoids, and they are equally, if not more beneficial in the entourage effect. So in ratio and condition-specific medicine, it's important that we at least share that information in this document. I understand the hesitation to recommend. We do understand that, although we hope it changes, but at least to provide that information would really help. That particular issue is addressed very robustly in current Israeli studies, of which there are many and very, very credible. And I hope that we can at least access that information and include a little bit more balance in this document. It is very, very weighted regulatorily. And we understand that that's where most of the information came from, but there's an awful lot of other very, very good information. So thank you very much.
I think it's important that we understand that anytime we put any type of benefit, it's going to be perceived as a recommendation. So we really need to caution that and understand. Benefit leads to recommendation. So we just need to remind us of all that.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, good afternoon. Is the public going to be able to comment?
Identify yourself for the audience, please.
Sure. Stacey Evans. I'm a policy consultant that protects veterinarians from legal liability. I also represent a company that sells hemp-based products to veterinarians directly. So my question is, will the public have opportunity to comment on the hemp and cannabis issue, later on, or is this pretty much it? Like, once you guys go through the definitions, will we be able to comment, or is it?
I'm not sure if you mean today or
today.
Future.
Today. I could submit comments now or later. I was just going to wait to hear what you guys were going to say about the definitions before I came back up here.
No, I would say, go ahead.
Okay. I will do that. Thank you. So, I looked at the draft guidelines and everything, and the concern I have is with the definition of cannabis. It includes hemp, and while yes, hemp is a part of a cannabis plant, legally in California, hemp is not cannabis.
Okay, I think I misunderstood your question.
Yes.
Let me describe more specifically then. The guidelines are the very first part of this packet section. They account for 3 pages. 1, 2, 3 pages. That's what the BMB is mandated to put on the website by January 1st, 2020. The remaining documents in the packet, just referred to as the collection of material that the committee is using to have this discussion, are not necessarily going to be on the BMB website, part of the packet. They may be. That isn't the committee's determination.
Okay.
So I don't think it's going to serve a whole lot of value to go line by line and pick apart one person's definition of cannabis versus another. The point is, there are a lot of people that come to this topic with such a variety of knowledge base. We have to start somewhere. We have to put down cannabis, and this is how you spell it, and then go from there. There were other things that were on this list that council decided wasn't the best idea to include or wasn't necessary. And we included the bill for obvious reasons.
Yes.
And we included the farm bill, and we included what I thought was the most seminal, in this case, FDA cite and comment from Dr. Gottlieb. Otherwise, I would caution you not to take this as a signed, sealed, and delivered thing. This is just kind of fodder for discussion.
Okay, no good. I'm glad you clarified that, because I wasn't certain if that was part of the guidelines or not. Yeah, but that's the point I wanted to make. And just like the hemp, and this is the only other thing I would like to bring up. It says that it contains less than 0.03%. It's actually 0.3% of THC. That's probably just a typo on page 4 of the definitions.
Yes, you were right.
It's probably just a typo. I made the same typo, okay? So I understand. But that's just a point I wanted to raise.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Gentlemen?
My name is Dr. Tim Shue. I'm the founder of SCBD. We've been making animal cannabis products since 2015. I want to present myself to make myself available for you if you have any questions about cannabis and its use in animals.
Max Wellness, legislative and regulatory advocate here on behalf of NCBD, with some specific feedback on the background and guidelines in the document. First and foremost, taking a step back, if you were reading through this background document, you wouldn't be aware that cannabis is legal in the state of California. Cannabis does remain a Schedule I controlled substance through the State Uniform Controlled Substances Act, but HSC 11362.1 allows an individual to possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis for personal use or 8 grams of concentrate, and 11362.3 allows for the cultivation of sub 6 plants. So I'm just concerned that the background document the committee is proposing to put forward does not acknowledge that where California is with regards to cannabis, and the fact that we also, furthermore, have a highly regulated system of cannabis licensing in the state of California. I was a staffer in the state legislature working on the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act of 2015, which then turned into now CURSA after Prop 64 passed. We have 3 sets of regulations from the Department of Public Health, the Bureau of Cannabis Control, Department of Food and Agriculture. One of those sets of regs goes up to 140 pages, other 2 are around 90 pages or so. This is in addition to a very exhaustive statutory basis. So So an acknowledgement in the background of the legal status of cannabis in California beyond simply a reference to the Controlled Substances Act and lumping cannabis in with drugs that have truly not have demonstrated to have medicinal value, which has not been the case with cannabis, which has been legal in the state for medicinal purposes since 1996. In addition to the
I'm sorry, I have to distinguish. While what you say is correct, cannabis is legal in the state of California. This is the Veterinary Medical Board. We're talking about use in animals.
Absolutely. And what I'm trying to clarify is that veterinarians should know that despite they're not being able to prescribe or recommend cannabis, that it's still a state legal product that's gone through a state legal licensed, taxed, tested, regulated supply chain. There are products out there available that's not just the illicit market.
And still under the purview of the FDA. So we still have to abide by page 6, FDA and cannabis questions and answers, and then page 7 is the statement from Scott Dowd. The FDA still maintains authority via the FD&C Act, Food Drug and Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act.
Right, and this is specific, those statements are specific to the hemp CBD issue. If you go and dive into it, specific to the Farm Bill as enacted in 2018, this is still a state legal product, even if it's not federally legal, even if there's the FDA issue there. That is, the language in those documents is referring to the FDA maintaining authority over hemp CBD, and there is a state bill, AB 228, that would go and have the state of California assert control over hemp CBD and hemp CBD licensing and regulation. That bill is going to Assembly Choice. Just to pivot away from this point on the background of it, I want to touch on the recommendation. I did not mean to, not intend this to come across as combative. I apologize for that. On the topic of recommendation, taking a step back, my work again has been focused primarily on cannabis and cannabis policy. The term recommendation, a physician's recommendation, is a term of art within state cannabis policy, and it going back to Prop 215, 1996, that's referring to the ability of a physician to recommend cannabis and having that recommendation a written document signed by the physician to be able to allow the patient to go and be able to enter a dispensary. That is where the recommendation started. It was the ability of a patient pre-Prop 64 to go cultivate their own plants and possess cannabis. What I'm getting at is that the decision to not have the word recommend in AB 2215 was also involved by the fact that there was not a desire at that time to have veterinarians being issuing written recommendations for walking into dispensaries and have veterinarian being the path for access there. That was not a desire. But when I looked back at the video from the January meeting, there was a lot of conflating of the term of the veterinarian's recommendation, or the idea behind the recommendation, with the idea of being able to discuss and recommend products in a more colloquial fashion. And so I want to just highlight the distinction of recommendation being very much a term of art that's been tied to access and patient status and legal protections under the law, as opposed to just saying, I have a preference for a product, or a preference or favor, or think cannabis is an option you should consider. There's, within the medical side, it's very clearly differentiated. And so I know there's been a lot of back and forth about that.
I think what Dr. Pollard was trying to say is that the Veterinary Medical Board's requirement under 2215 is that the the board has to adopt guidelines for veterinarians to follow discussing cannabis within the veterinary client-patient relationship. So these guidelines do not discuss human use or human access for personal use. This is solely directed at veterinarians who are extremely limited as to what they can prescribe or administer, dispense, or recommend. So that's all we're focused on, because clearly there's a lot of information that could have gone into these guidelines, but we're trying to simplify this and just meet out our requirement of the law. So I appreciate that you're very knowledgeable about MCRSA, but I don't think that for the board's purposes, it needs to go beyond a discussion of veterinary action, documentation, and discussion.
I do understand and recognize that the exclusion from the background. I just am hoping that when there's discussions over what the meaning of the word recommend is, I know these are guidelines simply for discussion. There's been a lot of questions over what crosses from discussion to recommendation. And so I'm asking that if there's determinations on where that line is, that the traditional and historical use of recommendation be considered, and that it not be put in such a limiting fashion as the multiple phrase. So, thank you.
Yes, Bonnie Lutz, I'm an attorney. Again, I have no affiliation with anybody who sells CBD or hemp products or anything. I just defend veterinarians. And I have had several calls from veterinarians saying that they've been approached by salespeople who are saying that the hemp products are illegal, that they don't fall under the new Business and Professions Code. And arguably, that's true because of the definitions in the Health and Safety Code. So I'm just asking either this group or the board to consider clarification on that issue, and specifically with the definitions on page 4 of 14. It would be great if those definitions of cannabis and hemp complied with the California Health and Safety Code sections, because Health and Safety Code section 11018 defines cannabis and then specifically excludes industrial hemp. Health and Safety Code section 11018.1 defines cannabis products, and Health and Safety Code section 11018.5 defines industrial hemp products. And so if that could be clarified, I think that would ease the confusion a little bit. I know that this is all a moving target and it's moving very fast, but I am getting calls from vets about the use of hemp products with less than 0.3% of THC. So if we could just clarify it in the definitions, that would be great.
Any committee comments?
Maybe Jessica and Sarah could speak to I've heard from many people that because of the new farm bill, that many people assume that or think that that CBD products are legal now. Maybe if we could have more information about that.
We're not, a body that regulates cannabis. We regulate professional individuals who are licensed. So as far as, better defining or, what is legal and what's not, all of that pertains to what's legal for human consumption, not animal consumption. So, while I think that, we could definitely tighten up some of the definitions to correspond with the health and safety code, I don't think we need to veer off and start talking too much about what's legal for humans to possess, because we're just interested in treatment of animals. So until the legislature determines that we can start recommending, I don't think that we need to go down that path.
Hi, Paul Hansberg, just for a little bit of clarification, although the jury is still out on this, but because there's no consensus. As far as I know, the hemp products have become legal because of the Farm Bill. However, the DEA has weighed in and saying that a cannabinoid is a cannabinoid is a cannabinoid, and still the CBD is still a controlled substance. They're arguing about that. I don't think it's really been settled and determined, but according to the DEA, technically CBD products are still a controlled substance federally. So that means I hope that sheds. I hope that muddies the water just a little bit more.
Hi, Stacey Evans again. Yes, you know, there are different types of CBD, as you know. There's CBD from marijuana and hemp. The one from hemp has been removed from the Controlled Substances Act following the enactment of the 2018 Farm Bill. So just wanted to clarify that. And I echo Bonnie's comments about, you know, the clarification of cannabis in the definition section. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jamie Payton, veterinarian. I'm the Chief of Service Integrated Medicine at UC Davis Veterinary Medical Teaching Hospital. I just wanted to comment on a couple things that have been said, especially looking at the number 1 bullet point for the guidelines. One comment was made, and I think that the guidelines are really appropriate, and we look at the level reporting, of course, to protect consumers. I wanted to say, one, I think for veterinarians, this is such a hot topic for veterinarians. I don't think the issue of CE is as big of a deal. Veterinarians really want to learn about this. So I don't think that it so much needs to be all clarified in the guidelines. Veterinarians are seeking out information. I think the biggest problem is where the sources for the CE are coming from at the moment, and making sure that we incorporate literature. But on a separate topic, I did want to say that to clarify something that was earlier about the survey, it is correct, you know, veterinarians, we are becoming more involved, but one of our questions from the survey was when the survey, just to clarify, was looking at clients who use some sort of hemp or cannabis product for their pet. They were given an anonymous survey online, and we did have about 1,800 respondents, which is great. But the one question that was asked was who recommends the dose that you are using for your pet, and only 8% was from veterinarians. This is a good thing. But the important thing and positive thing to me in talking about developing CE for veterinarians is that we also asked, did you discuss your use of this product with your veterinarian? And 65% had talked to the veterinarian. So we're growing that area. And in bridging from that, when we look at the first bullet point, you're saying the variability of quality and safety of cannabis products. I wanted to put it out to the board or the committee to say, I wonder if we also should say the differences. So instead of just the variability, but the differences of sources, composition, and a little word on administration, and variability in quality and safety and testing of cannabis products. Because hearing some of the comments from these other companies, there are very responsible companies that do testing, but one of the most important things is that products aren't just from the companies, they're from neighbors, they're from individuals, and so it's really part of the CE for veterinarians is to learn this. But I do think that it's important for records that we tell the clients, that there is differences in sources, like hemp or true cannabis. There's differences in composition, the oils that are being used. There's differences in how they're administering them, because they're, we know that from all the human literature. And there is some now for pharmacokinetics of the animals. And then the variability of quality, safety, and testing, because I think it is important that we know about the testing as well. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, that maybe that needs to be added.
The survey that you referred to, could you tell us what it was and who was the collection 1,800 plus?
Sure. So the survey was put out last year. It was over a period of 7 months. We closed it in March of this year. Oh gosh, I can't remember what day it is today. We closed it in February this year. And we basically put it out on social media, brought it to the attention of other veterinarians. It was an anonymous online. So it was specifically for clients or pet owners, not veterinarians, but pet owners that were using a hemp or cannabis product. So it definitely has an inherent bias, but the goal was to gather information to what these pet owners view of these products, what they were using, as well as is there discussion with the veterinarians, and specifically what discussion, and to start that initial conversation.
Was it associated with UCDs?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the group to whom it was addressed would have had either some connection to the school, pet treated, or a Facebook group, or something like that?
So this was, what we did is actually, it is a survey that was done through the anonymous way that they can apply for it, but it was sent out not just specifically to our clients, it was sent out to the general population. So through our clinical emails, through the social media, so anyone, not just in the state of California, but anyone in the U.S. as well as internationally, although I will say that the majority was within the U.S. and California based on where the survey was coming from.
Dr. Pate made a couple of points about bullet point number 1. What does the committee think about the value of adding differences in sources, composition, means of administration, testing of the bullet point? Kristen?
I think she brings up a valid point. It's the same kind of area that we talk about when sourcing other medications. Where are you getting it? Are you getting it from the manufacturer? Are you getting it directly from a reputable source? So I think we're bringing up a topic that is no different than any other type of.
Well, the legality makes it work.
Well, it does, but I'm saying it's very similar to any other type of medication. We're asking, are you getting it? And make sure you're not getting it from your neighbor. You don't know the quality that you're getting. You don't know what kind of testing. We're bringing up very valid. If we're bringing up the variability in quality and safety, I think that testing and the other factors she's bringing up is it's a valid question. It's a valid thing to bring up.
So adding that as a bullet point or modifying one of them to include it, what do you think, Dr. Warren?
I think that we could add it to that first bullet point. I think that's what I was thinking of when I said, that quality and safety. I was thinking those things, so I don't have any concerns about those things unless it changes something legally.
Well, it might stimulate. So if somebody was their little baseline of knowledge introduction, it might stimulate somebody to look into those specific concerns or down the road. Okay, good. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank
you. Any other public comments? Opinions?
Mark Nunez, Veterinary Medical Board. I want to go back to the paragraph before the bullet points. You had talked about removing some of those words like appropriateness because it would imply that it's kind of a recommendation. But I feel that it might be a good word to keep in there because it might also stimulate the discussion. If a person comes in, they're using cannabis for anxieties or for pain management or for cancer treatment. part of a discussion should be a discussion about other drugs that are used for those situations as well. Like perhaps it would be more appropriate to use an anti-anxiety medication or referral to a veterinary medicine. That would be more appropriate than cannabis. Or various analgesics that are available. That might be a little bit more appropriate than cannabis. So you wanted to eliminate that line because it would potentially be seen as a recommendation, but I also could see it being used as something too. There's other drugs that might be more appropriate.
Thoughts? I think you make a good point. Given it's in the cannabis guidelines, although people who might have a specific indication in mind, anxiety, for example, maybe they already tried or considered, if not tried, other FDA-approved products. Where do they have? Tara, could you speak to appropriateness in that context?
I don't see a legal barrier to it.
To leave it in? Or
to change it or to leave it in. I think it's really more of a policy issue.
Yes,
I just wanted to thank you for the inclusion of the word testing in number 1. Drugs in the legal cannabis market, if they're being used for animal use, they still be tested for 66 pesticides, for heavy metals, for mycotoxins, for microbeals, or to go be sold and like state licensed retailer. So thank you for that.
I'll be really fast. When looking at these guidelines, I like guidelines to be really broad, because once you start putting too many specific things in the guidelines, and this is going to change over time. This whole cannabis thing is going to change rapidly over time, and I don't know that even as hard as you're working on this, that you're going to be able to keep up with it. So my recommendation would be, when in doubt, stick with the broadest guidelines you can rather than narrowing it down, because the board still has the ability to go after the veterinarian for negligence or incompetence. So this isn't giving carte blanche. There's still that standard of care issue, but I worry about getting too specific in these guidelines, which then would be hard to keep up with and would be hard for an individual veterinarian to necessarily keep up with. And again, you've still got the negligence and incompetence issue you can go after them for.
Just quickly, I want to also thank you for including testing. We also included your definition of cursive. That's something that's
that's what you said, the definition of
the Medicinal Adult Use Cannabis Regulation Safety Act, now cursive.
Oh, okay.
It talks about the cultivation, distribution, transportation, storage, manufacturing, processing, and sale. It doesn't mention testing, and it's a very critical part of the process. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, I think we.
Do we have new phrasing for bullet point 1?
Yeah, let's
Just
well, combining Dr. Payton's and Bonnie Lutz's point, I think the seminal addition should be the testing. Okay, so if we added testing to one of these bullet points, number 1, I suppose would be the most logical.
leaving outsourced.
Variability in quality. Two hands. If you get quality and sources and safety of different cannabis products, how's that? You want to hear all of that? Or? Yes. So the variability of quality and safety and different sources of cannabis products.
Testing.
I think it should be a different bullet point.
Big testing.
Unless you're considering.
Why don't you just put it inside the parentheses?
Which parentheses?
So just keep it variability of quality and safety, and then pesticide contamination, stick it in there somewhere. Considering these things, but not limited to, and then list them all out.
Okay, so put in that parentheses testing.
Testing. Source.
Okay, testing source.
But those parentheses go to cannabis products. So if you want to put it in quality and safety, the parentheses after quality.
You mind using the microphone, just in case?
The items listed inside the parentheses are defining cannabis products. And so I don't believe it fit under there, but perhaps after quality and safety, putting in there the different sources, demonstration, testing. So just list it. Yeah.
We always do this badly, editing on the fly. The variability of quality, comma, safety, comma, testing of cannabis products. And then leaving current parentheses as is. Okay, I'm going to write that down. Okay, good. So I think.
May I just
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you for cutting the apple. Testing is not a variable in terms of the consistency. Yes, that can be a variable. The source, yes, that can be a variable. But the testing is the testing is the testing. As a matter of fact, it will become even stricter as time goes on in terms of heavy metals and pesticides. So it might be more appropriate in terms of the actual definition of the word to attach it to Mount Cursa.
I actually did a CE not too long ago, and the instructor specifically had some concerns about testing. Specifically, she said certificate of analyses can sometimes be fudged. So that would, at the very least, be a variability in testing.
You make a good point. In terms of regulatory statute, it is not a variable, but in practice, you make a good point. Thank you.
Well, I think then we will take this next version to the Veterinary Board tomorrow. And do we need, Jessica, any type of a motion? Seems like a continuing.
Yeah, so if you're just taking it to the board, the update of gathering more comments and you're still working on it, then I think that needs a motion. But if you're proposing right now something forward to the board, I don't think that.
Agreed. Okay, sounds good.
Deep thought there. Or was it just a breath, sigh of breath?
All right, let's move on to the next agenda, item number 7. Update from the complaint process audit committee. And that would be Dr. Lazarchuk and me, who participated in a teleconference March 14th with Enforcement Desk Manager Rob Stephanopoulos and Executive Officer Jessica. We discussed Kind of as a piggyback off the last meeting's report in January, a continued collaboration between the subcommittee and the Veterinary Board, specifically regarding expert witness training, similar to the topics that we gave in the summary in January: consistency, feedback, training, and retraining. Nothing particularly new. We just wanted to get on the same page. Dr. Elijah, Jeff, anything yet? No. Okay. Committee questions? Item number 8, future agenda items and meeting dates. Where are we with regard to July's meeting? Well, is that set in stone? Are we going to be there?
Yeah, it's most likely to be in foothill.
Okay. And then I had I think within this packet, written here is October 9th. I know we moved that 1 week forward from the previous original schedule. And then I saw both a different date, October 15th, and I saw it Western. Was it at some point scheduled?
Yeah, the intent was to be able to hold meetings at the schools and colleges, but Western was not able to have us in October, and plus we had to move it to Sacramento because of the strategic planning session that the board will be doing. So the goal is to have the January 2020 meeting in Western.
Okay, January 12th. Okay. Multidisciplinary Advisory Committee assignment priorities. Item number 8. The 3 topics we discussed today are all kind of on our list. Tomorrow we will pick up more.
And one thing also that I'm requesting that the committee consider is the issue that the board looked at related to MGLs and new premise registration. I think that once the board started that discussion at the last meeting, we realized there's bigger issues that are occurring that includes more research and consideration before moving kind of legislation forward. So I would like to bring that to the committee at the next meeting.
Okay. We will figure out who we'd like to do that. Should be where there's a record. Okay.
October 9th appears to be a Wednesday, is that correct?
You're asking if it's a
Yeah,
Wednesday
we
or
have a
a
Wednesday meeting, yeah, it says October 9th, and I just went.
I assume it's a typo, it should be Tuesday. Is that right?
So it should be the 8th.
Good
The board meeting
catch.
can get 3 days.
Good catch, thank you. So that's October 8th, Tuesday in Sacramento. I'll call you Professor.
I guess I was can we rewind between the saw and these microphones? We can't hear you, so can you go back just and tell us what it was you just said?
Okay.
Rewind.
I would listen to it on the playback, but we won't hear it.
Good point. All right, so
Okay,
future
just-
agenda meeting dates are July 16th in the Bay Area, probably at Foothill College, and Tuesday, October 8th in Sacramento. And then, not on the list here, but
what did you say, Justin, about the premises permit?
Yeah,
oh, that's right.
so as you recall, in the January meeting, the board had looked at proposed legislative changes to address MGLs and VIST and ownership. The language that the board had looked at was addressing who owns the building, not necessarily the practice of veterinary medicine. During that discussion, we also looked at application for premise registration and what's actually being captured versus what's supported by statute or regulation. And so I think there's more issues that need to be vetted before we propose any kind of legislation.
Thank you.
You're at item number 9. We have a motion for adjournment. Oh, sorry, Val, comment?
The saw goes on, and that's for the public, but I just wanted to publicly acknowledge Dr. Drewsy. There's very few of us in the room that have probably been to as many MDC meetings as he and I, and maybe a few others behind me. And when we put MDC together many, many years ago, it was designed to be a hard working group who did some really difficult research and hit some tough topics, and I know Dr. Drewsy has been a part of that. And it's been rough a few times along the way, but he's done a tremendous job, and I just, on behalf of the CBMA, wanted to thank him. Thank you.
Here.
I'd like to add to that and also thank Dr. Drewsy. He's been my personal mentor for a decade and a half. I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for him. And I'd also like to wish him a happy birthday today.
I'm out of here.
We need a second, please.
No,
Thank you very much, everybody.